Have you ever faced a difficult time in your life, a time of suffering, a time of serious trials that have come to you as a Christian? How did you handle that situation? Hello, my name is Trey Talley. I'm the pastor of the church at Pecan Creek, located in Denton, Texas. We've been studying the book of James, and today we're just going to go over a few of those passages and a few related passages as it pertains to dealing with trials and suffering as a Christian. We'll start here in the book of James, chapter 1. And he says, verse 2, count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness, and let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking on nothing. And I know I've talked about this in the last few videos, but I'm just going to kind of wrap it up maybe today, then we'll move forward a little bit. But from this passage, we see that the reaction to trials is to be joy. And part of that is because we know that God has placed them there in our lives. They're not by accident. They're in God's sovereignty and his providential care of us. And he does them to produce something, to bring about steadfastness and maturity so that our faith may mature. So we see that they are from God. A great cross-reference from this is Philippians chapter 1. If you're following along, I'll give you a second to get there. But Philippians chapter 1, verse 29. Look what Paul says. He said, for it has been granted to you that for the sake of Christ, you should not only believe in him, but also suffer for his sake, engaged in the same conflict that you saw I had, and now hear that I still have. So here in this passage as well, we find that not only is there salvation granted by God and from God, but also their suffering. So that these two, and it's hard for us to reconcile in our mind sometimes, but God not only brings us to him for salvation, but there is also a suffering that was granted to these Philippian believers, and obviously that suffering was granted to Paul as well. We can recall many of his sufferings from being shipwrecked to being stoned multiple times, stoned virtually to death. They thought they had killed him, to being whipped, to being imprisoned many, many times and many years, to the point of even praying for a physical ailment that he had that was so bad for it to go away. But God said, no, it's there, and it's there for your good. So he rested. Paul rested in the sovereignty of God and understood that God had it there for a good reason. But we can also turn to the book of Job. In the book of Job, we also see that God granted suffering for Job. And again, sometimes this hurts our minds to think about a little bit, but it's good to understand that if you're going through a time of trial, that God is still with you, and God has a plan, God has a purpose for this, and that we are to have joy as we go through it. But here in the book of Job, we find that Satan was looking for someone, and God actually recommended the most righteous man on the earth. So it wasn't as if he was, we might call him a very bad guy or anything like that, or someone who's possibly the most immature Christian on earth or immature believer on earth at that time. But he was the most righteous man on earth. And God literally recommends him to Satan. Let's look at a little bit of this dialogue quickly today. Satan says, have you not put a hedge around him and his house, here in chapter 1, verse 10, and all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he will curse you to your face. And the Lord said to Satan, behold, all that he has is in your hand. Only against him do not stretch your hand. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. So from this, we see that God is obviously in control. He is sovereign. Satan is not equally sovereign or equally as powerful as God. He has to get permission from God, but God even recommends Job in this situation. So Satan does exactly what God has allowed him to do. He goes and takes all of Job's riches, his wealth, his servants, his family dies as well. He is left with his wife, which she goes on to say, it is good for you to curse God and die because you've lost everything. So she's not necessarily a help to him at that time. Then Job chapter 2, we see that Satan comes back, and Satan realizes that Job has not sinned. So he comes back, and once again, God recommends Job. Look at verse 3 in Job chapter 2. And the Lord said, have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil? This is after he's had everything and his family taken away, by the way. God says he still holds fast his integrity, although you incited me against him to destroy him without reason. Then Satan answered, the Lord has said, skin for skin, all that a man has he will give up for his life. But stretch out your hand and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will curse you to your face. And the Lord said to Satan, behold, he is in your hand, only spare his life. So we see from there that Satan goes out and destroys Job's flesh, but keeps him alive. He is covered in loathsome sores from the verse 7 says, from the top of his head to the bottom of his feet. It is so bad. So the remaining chapters of Job have to deal with what we always refer to as the trials of Job. And they are serious. It is no small matter. But we find that the most righteous man on earth goes through these trials. He has all of his wealth taken away from him. He has his family taken away from him. His land, his home, everything is gone. He is left with his wife, who is not a big support for him. There are friends that come along, but for the most part, they are negative as well and blaming this upon him and accusing him of sin. And Job does not sin against God, but Job does ask God why. And this is something we're highly prone to do as we're going through trials, is to continue to ask why. And at some point that can be okay. But at some point we have to just rest in the sovereignty of God and strive to be obedient to God as we go through the trial. Many things are beyond our understanding. The Bible lets us know that his ways are above our ways, and we trust in God. We have the insight of looking back at Job's situation and seeing how all this panned out. We see how it turned out for him, that he goes through these trials and he comes out at the end a man who actually understands God much better. Job later on says, I thought I knew you, but now I see you for who you truly are, and is wonderfully blessed by going through this trial. So my point to you today is, if you're going through trials, if you're going through a difficult time, a time of even suffering in your life, don't doubt God, don't doubt God's love for you, and don't doubt God's plan. These trials are there, and they're to bring about maturity. Continue to persevere, continue to keep your eyes on Christ, continue to cling to Christ as you go through these various trials. A few quick tips as we leave here today. When you're going through these trials, know that you're in good company with others who have gone through trials, such as Job, all right? Number 2, continue to walk in righteousness. Don't let this be an excuse or a reason or justification to sin. Number 3, continue to trust in God, and remember that God uses trials for your good. We see this exemplified in Paul, Job, many others as well, all the way to James, saying this is the normal lot for Christians. Number 4, be joyful because you know that God is working on you. Number 5, if you struggle to have the right mindset as you face a trial, pray for wisdom. That's what James says next. Pray for wisdom if you don't have it. Number 6, remember that your eternal reward will outweigh whatever temporary sufferings you're facing during this life. Hey, thanks for listening. I hope you have a great day.